We often say that the digital trust concept is being disrupted by AI. Is it really true? Isn't managing AI, governing AI, managing the risks around AI the real thing? Do you really believe in it? And if so, what is the role of different frameworks that exist? The ISO 42001, the EU AI Act, the World Economic Forum Digital Trust Framework, and so on and so forth. What are these? Are these to be used as is? Or are these to be used as a means to review your governance and risk management processes? Well, these are all relevant questions. And who better than Mark Thomas, who's ISACA Hall of Fame and provides advisory and consulting to companies on digital trust matters to talk about all this? So let's go and talk to Mark.
Hello, and welcome to the Fit for Privacy Podcast with Punit Bhatia. This is the podcast for those who care about their privacy. Here, your host, Punit Bhatia, has conversations with industry leaders about their perspectives, ideas, and opinions relating to privacy, data protection, and related matters. Be aware that the views and opinions expressed in this podcast are not legal advice. Let us get started.
So, hello and welcome to another episode of Fit for Privacy Podcast. And today we have with us Mark Thomas. Mark, welcome to Fit for Privacy Podcast.
Thank you very much for having me. It's always a pleasure chatting with you.
Absolutely, it is the same here. I enjoy talking to you and listening to your speeches. So, let's start with the fundamental question these days: trust, the digital trust in the digital environment. How would you define this digital trust?
It's, this has been around for a couple of years, and a lot of people that go out to the internet these days, you always see this thing that says digital trust, digital trust, digital trust. Well, when I started getting into digital trust with an association called ISACA, I was part of the building of the digital trust ecosystem framework. One of the things that we wanted to do was define what we meant by digital trust, because there's a lot of different perspectives out there. And I think a lot of the research I did, they were focusing specifically on financial transactions and security-based types of things. You could lose trust with an organization for a lot more than just a bad financial transaction or a cybersecurity kind of event and so on. So there's a couple key things that we really did that I like to define digital trust. And one key word in here is called confidence. It's confidence in this relationship of this integrity of the interactions and the transactions. Interactions, you and I may have trust just in our interactions. We may have trust in transactions, but they're between two roles: a provider of a service and product and a consumer of a product or service. And they're in this thing called a digital ecosystem. And today everybody is digitally transforming. Well, we've been digitally transforming for decades now. We're just using different technologies to do that. We're trying to reduce that amount of friction that we have between us as providers and our consumers. So it's the way as organization really puts together its people, organizational structures, processes, information to maintain that digital trustworthy world. So it's about those seamless interactions and transactions.
Okay. And in this digital world, there's something we talk about: artificial intelligence these days.
Yeah.
Now, many people say that the AI is disrupting the digital trust. Do you agree with that?
Uh, there's yes and no. A lot of that depends on how well an organization governs its AI. Because there's two pieces here. There's one piece of AI that I may go out to Chat GPT to find me some ideas for a presentation. But as an organization builds its AI platforms, right, that information now has to be trustworthy. Because you've seen all the a lot of stories out there about somebody does this question on Chat GPT and it gives them an answer that is so wildly insane, but it's something that was written somewhere on the internet. But I think that sometimes it can behave unpredictably if you don't govern your machine learning and your generative AI platforms. It can lack transparency, or it can be used unethically, like making biased decisions about certain buying decisions or misusing personal data, enabling surveillance when somebody didn't allow that from a privacy perspective. So there are some risks that challenge users, their confidence, and raise concerns. But overall, it's interesting is, technology, in this case, AI, could do a lot of great things. We can have all these, but sometimes it only takes that one to make the entire industry say, "Oh, it's bad, it's bad." No, I think we're getting to a point where governance and management of AI structures are the top of decisions right now. And in the boards that I'm talking with, they want it, they need it, and they're adding governance over this. But I do want to make a case here that don't freak out over AI, right? Because I remember years ago when I first got into the IT world, client server technology blew my mind. It took me a long time to understand client server. Now that's old news, right? Cloud blew my mind, right? We all freaked out. Now everybody's freaking out. We were freaking out over Internet of Things. Then all these, and now it's AI. But guess what it's going to be in 5 years from now, or maybe longer? It's going to be quantum computing. So the way we govern these things, I think, is a way to really look at it. So there is a negative example, right? ChatGPT, right? There was a data leak incident a couple years ago. OpenAI's ChatGPT experienced a bug, and it exposed portions of user conversation histories and payment-related information to other users, right? And it was for a brief period. But some users could actually see snippets of other users' chats and billing information. What I tell people is you use a generative AI tool somewhere, somehow, somebody typed that information in somewhere. And now we're collectively using that. And so that case disrupted some trust, right? Because there's a privacy violation, there's a transparency gap, and then there was concerns over ethical governance kind of concerns. But I think that even a small bug in an AI system that's widely adopted and seen as cutting edge can create a large impact on public trust. And I think we advertise and we miss the fact that there are so many positive things being done from an AI perspective, from public protection, from safety, all those pieces there. I think there's a lot for us to look at, because we love attacking the negative side of it, but we don't realize that we've developed a lot of trust in a lot of organizations from an AI perspective that we didn't actually know was AI. But when it goes wrong, we certainly know it was AI. They're the first verse to blame. So a lot of them. I mean, would you agree with that, or would you think there's other areas that I might be missing there?
No, I would fully agree with you. I think a lot of the press, a lot of the media tends to focus on the negative, and any technology, be it cloud, be it AI, be it quantum, when something goes wrong, gets a lot of press, but a lot of 90% plus, 98, 99% goes right. And that is never talked about. But you bring in another important point. It's not AI that's disrupting, it's the newness, it's the unfamiliarity, it's the speed, it's the impact that it creates. That is scary, and that is disrupting the trust. And if you govern it well, if you manage it well, if you identify your risks, manage it, and try to go a bit slow, if I call it, but slow, by slow I mean responsible AI, not slow meaning don't do it.
And
Do
you
it
mentioned
trustworthy, do it responsible.
you mentioned governance and risk. The concepts of governance and the concepts of risk haven't changed, right? It's just some people overdo them a little bit, but it's the same kind of thing, positively speaking, right? So I've worked with several banks. We're using AI to help find money laundering, right? MasterCard has invested heavily in AI-powered fraud detection systems, right? And they have this decision intelligence, which uses machine learning to analyze real-time transaction data. So if you've ever received a message from your credit card handler that says, "Hey, we've spotted this," that's a positive thing. They're actually helping you because they're using these systems to catch it. And they don't say, "FYI, we caught this with our AI tool," right? They don't say that. It's part of business. Yeah.
That's always the risky part. But I agree. If you manage it well, if you manage the risk, if you understand the risk and do it in a responsible manner, rather than being in a hurry to let it out, manage it, identify it, and then slowly bring it to the market with low risk. That is the way to do. But then if we have to manage the risk, and if we want to govern it well, and if we want to identify the risks, I think that's where frameworks or standards help a lot.
You got it. You got it. They truly do, and that's one of the recommendations I always make to people on looking at the various frameworks, standards out there to help you. And some of them, we get overloaded with frameworks, right? And I always talk about this phenomenon called framework fatigue. Right, there's a framework that's going to save every company. So many of them out there. So I'm sure we're going to hit some frameworks probably here in a little bit if you'd like to.
Mm-hmm.
So you taught frameworks. You want me to hit some frameworks for you?
I think I was thinking, now that we talked responsible AI, AI governance, AI risk management, and we also talked that this is new. So when something is new, it needs to be managed, it needs to be governed. Of course, we know how risks are managed, how governance is done, and it's all the same stuff which we've been doing on IT. But how do you apply that into an AI setup? Because when you apply it to a normal system, offline system 30 years ago, it was
Yeah.
different. Now, online, cloud-based, AI-based self-learning system, it's slightly different. So, what frameworks would you talk about? Recommend? I know there's the ISACA, there's a framework, there is
There's a
this
lot. Yeah,
ISO
there's a lot of them out there.
42001 NIST risk management framework. But
Yeah.
which ones are your favorites?
Like there's a couple I'll turn to, but so the first part of when you were mentioning is you were talking about governance and management. The first thing I want to do is make sure that we talk about this distinction between governance and management, right? Governance is direction and control, right? When we're talking about these are the policies, these are the delegations of authorities. These are, from a risk perspective, it is defining, say, our risk appetites and our tolerance levels and those types of things, right? So, and that's done usually through boards, committees, right, and sanctioned or chartered governing bodies. There are multiple governing bodies in an organization. Usually, that's started at the board, and then we have management. Management actually executes, and so when we're talking about AI, we're talking about trust specifically from a governance perspective. I want to make sure that, hey, we have transparency inside of our policies. We may embed ethical considerations into these pieces, validate that we're accurate with our models, right? And every one of these do require human oversight. We're not at the day where human eyeballs are not required. Everything, right, has to have some human eyeballs to make sure that that this is legitimate and communicate these things. But when we talk about different frameworks and standards and so on. When I really got into this several years ago, the first real framework that I looked at was by the World Economic Forum. The World Economic Forum has a digital trust framework. It's a global, multi-stakeholder approach to building digital trust, as the World Economic Forum would. And it was talking more about things like responsible technology use, cybersecurity, privacy, and so on. I didn't like it, but as a practitioner, I needed more. I needed more detail. It gave me a very strategic view. I needed more operational, more tactical kind of information. But key themes of this, because I do recommend people look at this from a global perspective, it has the ingredients you would expect. Ethics by design, cross-border collaboration, trust as a driver of innovation and inclusion. Okay, so that's one. I do want to tell you a little bit about this digital trust ecosystem framework today. And I'm not saying this just because I'm one of the core architects of the framework, but I will tell you that it is very practical. It's very outcomes based. It not only hits that governance level of trust, but it also hits the tactical and operational areas as well. It has several what we call trust factors in that. And the key things here, right, are trust relationships, and stakeholder value. It's always looking at that from an organizational perspective, because why does an organization exist? To succeed at meeting its goals and completing its strategy, right? But we also may be looking at risk, compliance, governance, continual improvement, and so on. So I do like the DTEF is what we call it. It's a good one out there that I do turn to quite often. NIST has actually, I love NIST. NIST has some great stuff, and I would suggest anybody looking at governance or overall risk. Of course, you have the risk management framework, right? But you also have the AI version of that, the AI risk management framework, and that's in a lot of times globally. People say, "Well, yeah, that's U.S. government stuff." Well, it is a free version of an ISO standard, basically, right? And,
Yeah.
I mean, I love ISO standards because we've got another one called ISO 42001 is the ISO standard for AI management systems. So if you're looking for standards out there, the NIST AI RMF, ISO 42001 are pretty good. OECD, Oscar Echo Charlie Delta, right, has AI principles. It's a pretty large global policy on responsible AI. Of course, the EU AI Act, and we've seen some significant amounts of standards and requirements coming out of the EU, especially when we look back at GDPR. Now we've got the EU AI Act, and that is a landmark legislative framework for regulating high risk and AI systems. And I'll also say there's several others, but I'll also say this, as we talked about governance. One of my favorite go-to frameworks, and it doesn't say anything about digital trust in it. It's called the COBIT framework. I believe the COBIT framework is, and this sounds very redundant, but the COBIT framework is a framework to manage frameworks. Right? It is my governance framework because it says, hey, you can use all these frameworks, but you need to have this central nucleus of understanding how you govern and how you manage, and then bring these other frameworks into it. Brings other things like TOGAF for architecture, ITIL for, say, service management, a lot of other project management methodologies, and so on. So we could go on for a long time on that, but I want to hit, I think, the big ones that where I have a question, I need to validate something. I'll go to one of those that we just talked about. I really like them a lot.
No, I use the same approach. So, and I like the fact that COVID is strong. COVID is strong because it told us, or it guided us to manage a system.
Yeah.
AI is also a system. So let's not forget that.
You got it. And I agree. That's why I said, don't freak out because it's AI, right?
Yeah,
It's
it's a
just
system.
one positive disruptive technology, because there's going to be another one after that, another one after that. If you have a good approach to how you govern, you shouldn't have to freak out. And it kind of goes to another role on governance, if you don't mind. I'm going to expand that conversation. And when it comes to digital trust and AI, specifically on the digital trust view, is I'm not saying go out and create a digital trust committee. I'm not saying go out and create a digital trust officer, because quite frankly, and many of your listeners know this, is we are also not only overwhelmed with frameworks, but we're overwhelmed with a number of committees, knee-jerk committees, right? That now we have a separate committee that's called AI, or a separate committee that's called digital trust. That's a subject that needs or should be integrated into your current committee structure, right? The chiefs, right? Now, all of a sudden, we're seeing we have a chief AI officer, we have a chief digital trust officer. Well, we're getting overwhelmed with chiefs, right? If we have so many chiefs, who's actually doing the work? And it's a very sensitive topic for me, because some organizations, based on their bureaucracy and their organization, they need a chief and they need a committee for it. I wouldn't suggest that in all cases, though. So I thought I'd throw that in there. I just don't want people to think that I'm saying, oh, go create a committee and go create a chief role for this. I think these can be integrated into your current governance structure. And again, depends on the organization. Yeah. What do you think about that?
The organization is the core part. If you are a GE or a Ford and you're spread all over the world, and you are very committee oriented, you need an AI committee, you need a digital trust committee, you need an ethics committee, a risk committee, like the banks have, non-financial risk, financial risk, all those committees are separate. That makes sense. But if you are a 500 person or 1,000 or even 5,000 people company, you don't need bureaucracy of 100 committees.
Right.
You have one committee, say, in my opinion, call it data committee, that takes care of your privacy, security, risk audit, but you put those agenda items. First 15 minutes, we are going to talk about risk. Then we are going to talk about privacy issues. Then we are going to talk about AI issues. And you run your data, whatever community like that. But that's where most companies get it wrong, I would say. And that's why
I agree with you.
I agree with what you're doing. Don't overdo it.
Yeah, because, and as we were mentioning before, very large multinational companies, one incident may not diminish trust enough to put them out of business. small to medium sized businesses, or somewhere smaller than your globals, an incident could put a real hurt on their revenues, on their customer retention, and those kinds of things. And I think that's a big deal. So it has a lot to do with your culture and so on. And plus, digital trust and AI, right? This is not just a relationship between a for-profit company and a customer of that company. I mean, think about all of these relationships. As an organization, I may be for profit, not for profit. I could be a church group. I could be an association, right? I could be a small business. Okay. But I have relationships not only with my customers, I have relationships with my vendors and my suppliers. And by the way, those vendors or suppliers, they're third party. I'm not just worried about them. I'm worried about their fourth party, fifth party, sixth party, seventh, right? I'm worried about that small entity that's part of this digital supply chain, that they're so small that they're not compliant to any laws or regulations because they're off the radar. They can create one vulnerability that could propagate itself into my company, right? And so you've got business to employee, right? My employees, they have to trust me and I have to trust them. There's digital trust there. There's trust that I have with my government entities. I may have to do reports. I have to file my taxes. I have to apply for permits, right? Do I trust all those things are taking place and so on? It's the one thing there that I think that that will scare a lot of people is what I call proxy technology, or that's that technology between you and I. And that's where sometimes people get nervous because you and I are peers, right? You and I may communicate with each other. We talk through email. We do all these things, right? But we may not trust some of the technology between us. My son lived in China for a little bit of time. He was doing a university, college university professor exchange thing. And before he left for China, he said, Dad, he said, the only way that you and I can literally talk to each other while I'm in China is through a messaging app called WeChat. Okay.
Yeah.
And he said, I just need you to know that I trust you. I trust everything between us, but don't trust WeChat because it is monitored, right? It is known as a Chinese kind of influenced organization. He said, so in this case, I trust you, but I don't trust the technology. And that's what happens to a lot of people. I may trust your organization, but I may not trust the technology. And another part of this, right, is AI is being used today to help organizations respond to events. Okay. Let's take another example. I'm a Marriott fan. I love the hotel chain Marriott. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Marriott has had a couple of unfortunate cybersecurity privacy related incidents. In fact, they were even fined under the GDPR. Okay. I've received messages from Marriott saying, hey, you've been compromised. Here's what we're doing, and so on. But I still trust Marriott. Okay. I've had friends of mine who, at the first sign of distress, left Marriott, said, I'm never going to that hotel chain again. But for some reason, the way Marriott treated me and the way they handled it, I continue to trust Marriott. So why is it that I trust Marriott and I have a lot of digital trust in Marriott where somebody else does not? And those are the things that are really interesting because it's not just that you're secure and that you protect privacy and that you're compliant. It's how your users and your customers feel. That's that. Remember, we said that's that confidence in the relationships of our interactions and transactions. Probably took that a little bit too far, but it's always an interesting kind of thing. And AI is just one of many technologies that are going to do the same thing for us over the next 10 to 15 years or beyond.
Yeah, I think confidence, perception, decisions, these are usually personal. Everybody perceives, decides, confides in their own way. You and I may be trustworthy for a few people, not for some people.
Right.
That's how it goes.
Exactly. Yeah.
But coming back to the frameworks angle that we are exploring, so yes, AI needs to be governed and managed, risks need to be managed. Yes, there are frameworks, but I know the answer, but I still like to ask you for the benefit of our audience, saying if there's an organization and they want to manage, govern the risks around AI in a more effective way, how do you go about leveraging these frameworks? Because typically I see, let's become ISO 42001 certified. Not
Right.
necessary in
Mhm.
my opinion. That's where I'm
Yeah.
asking you, how do
Yeah.
you
Mhm.
take all these and distill it into their practices? Because we talked about not setting a committee for everything.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah, and so it goes right back again to the kind of foundations and the core ingredients of governance, right? So when we're looking at governing, say AI, we're governing really around the digital trust around that. Is one is structure, organizational structures. We are moving so fast right now with high velocity IT. Right, we started with this thing called a waterfall approach, and then we moved to agile, and now we've got through things like AWS, Azure. We've got DevOps, where I can literally do thousands of changes a day. Structure says delegate levels of authority as much as you can, but those levels of authority can only be made under certain conditions, because we can no longer, right, say, oh, I can't make that decision. That has to get escalated to a committee. Now I know clear decision-making authority. There are some decisions that have exceeded your authority and need to be escalated. Get it? So the first one is organizational structure, absolutely key, right? Accountability is that kind of that ownership piece to that. Is I see too many organizations will delegate levels of authority, but when it comes time for that level, that delegated authority to escalate, right, they're afraid to make that decision, right, because they may not have the knowledge on it, kind of those kinds of things, and that's kind of oversight part of that. I truly think data and IT architecture is absolutely huge, and there's a framework called TOGAF. If you've heard of TOGAF before, your
Yeah.
listeners, it doesn't talk specifically about AI, but it says here are the building blocks of this. You've got data architecture, right? You've got the DMBOK, some other bodies of knowledge out there. So structure, accountability, architecture obviously is a big piece on that. And I truly think that it comes down to your basic processes, right? Your basic processes of incident management, continuity and disaster recovery, problem management, relationship management. I think those are kind of key to have there. But I will tell you this is the biggest killer to any governance system or program is culture and organizational change. Um, I've seen organizations that say, "Oh, we want to change," but then when it comes to leadership support, when it comes to funding, when it comes to training, there's no support. But they keep saying, "Change." So the culture at the leadership level says we want to do this, but they're not putting their money where the mouth is, not necessarily money, but it's the overall support. They want somehow, everybody wants to put this word called governance in front of everything. And they believe that somehow governance is going to magically occur, right? And you can't govern yourself. I can't tell you to govern yourself, because if I tell you to govern yourself, whether we're talking about AI initiatives, whether we're talking about good old fashioned IT governance, financial governance, so on. If I tell you to govern yourself, what I've just asked you to do is, number one, make up your own rules. Number two, determine which of your own rules you choose to follow. And number three, determine the consequences on those rules that you choose to break. You can't govern yourself. Wherever you are in an organization, I don't care if we're talking AI, I don't care if we're talking quantum computing in a few years, right? There's always a governing body setting the guardrails for you. That is the key thing, I believe. I'm not sure. Do you have any comments or feedback on that?
I would agree with that because you put in a nice spin around it. Because uh, typically people look at the framework or the
Mhm.
process as a solution. The process or the framework is as good as the implementation or execution you do. So your
Exactly.
risk management, your governance, your process, your management has to be strong enough,
Hmm.
and you use these tools. I call them the frameworks as tools,
Yeah,
as a
I do too.
means to review, to enhance, to enrich, to make them more effective and efficient. Maybe you say, oh,
Hmm.
ISO 42001 says you should do this. We are not doing that. Let's incorporate it into our process. The
Hmm.
digital trust enterprise framework of ISACA is saying this.
Hmm.
Are we doing it? Maybe let's check with our privacy colleague if in the privacy part it's being done or
Right.
not. That's
Right.
the way to use it. But don't expect, I have implemented ISO 42001 as a policy and we have a
Hmm.
digital trust framework or committee, and
Right.
it'll take care of itself. It won't.
Yeah.
Not at all.
I agree. You kind of made me think of a kind of a pet peeve I have when I do courses and some webinars and things like that. People know I'm a framework fanatic, just like you. We love our frameworks. The
Yeah.
framework doesn't make decisions. So I have people always say, okay, Mark, here's my scenario. I have A, B, C, D, E, and F. These are my situations. What does COBIT say? I'm like, nothing. Right? COBIT's not making your decision. It's not this punch list where you enter all these parameters and COBIT says, here's your decision. Now, AI is the same way, right? We can ask our generative model multiple questions. I've got A through F. What would you suggest? And people say, well, AI made the decision. AI did not make the decision, right? And I think a lot of people are hiding behind the fact that they said, well, that was an AI decision. AI doesn't make decisions. It's giving you the information to make decision. Human leadership will never be taken away, right? So
Exactly.
when you were saying that, I was like, I'm glad he brought that up. So that was
No,
pretty good.
you're 100% right. AI will help you make better decisions, but the decisions, better or worse, would still be made by you.
That's 100%. I agree with you 100% on that. You got it.
And that's, I think, a very good moment to say it has been a good conversation. But if somebody wants to contact you, how do they do that?
So I'm independent guy out in Phoenix, Arizona. You can contact me on my email address. That's Mark, MARK, at escoute.com. That's ESCOUTE. Or you can find me on LinkedIn. I'd be happy to be linked in with many of your listeners as well. And I do have information on this subject out on YouTube as well. And you can find me on markthomasonline.com.
Perfect, Mark. As always, a very interesting conversation, very energizing. Thank you so much for your time.
It's been a pleasure and honor, and we'll talk to you again very soon. Thank you so much for your time. Have a good week.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening. If you liked the show, feel free to share it with a friend and write a review. If you have already done so, thank you so much. And if you did not like the show, don't bother and forget about it. Take care and stay safe. Fit for Privacy helps you to create a culture of privacy and manage risks by creating, defining, and implementing a privacy strategy that includes delivering scenario-based training for your staff. We also help those who are looking to get certified in CIPPE, CIPM, and CIPT through on-demand courses that help you prepare and practice for certification exam. Want to know more? Visit www.fit4privacy.com. That's www.fit4privacy.com. If you have questions or suggestions, drop an email at hello@fit4privacy.com. Until next time, goodbye.